One Punch Man is an awesome anime show adapted from the manga series of the same name, in which it takes place in a universe in which superheroes actively protect a wide variety of cities throughout Japan that are constantly attacked by monstrous creatures. And for both the anime and the manga, the main character happens to be a man named Saitama, who once was just a regular guy, but eventually after various circumstances, he decided to just drop everything about his regular life and decided to train himself to become a superhero. After a few years of dedicating himself to an insane workout regimen, he eventually became the strongest superhero on the planet, but has one major problem. Well, two actually. For one thing, he becomes incredibly bored by the lack of challenge that other monsters pose to him. And the second thing is that nobody knows who he is. And so whenever he tries to perform these amazing things for people, either they don't take notice or think that he's some kind of jerkish vigilante. So that's the struggle he has to deal with throughout season 1 of the show, and then in season 2, after he's become more well known and joins what's called the Hero Association, a group of superheroes that are employed by the government and to protect the people, things start to get out of hand once the monsters become much more of a problem for all the cities around Japan, and then other threats come up as well. Now, if you can't tell by the shirt I'm wearing, I am a huge fan of this show. I loved the first season so much that I ended up buying it on Blu-ray. I normally don't do this for TV shows, but when I love a show so much, and it means so much to me, I feel the need to not only have the subscription service that I can stream it anywhere on and any time on, but I like to have it on Blu-ray just for the sake of being a collector, and that's just how I am. Before sharing my thoughts on both season 1 and season 2, I kind of want to give a background to how I got started in watching this series, because for me it's kind of an interesting one. Growing up, I didn't really watch a whole ton of anime. I mean, I always liked the style between playing a lot of Nintendo games. As a kid, I caught up with a lot of shows that were on Kids WB, like all the original Pokemon series, Yu-Gi-Oh! So I was definitely familiar with that, and then throughout middle school reading some manga here and there. But I never fully got into anime that much until after watching more anime films after I got home from my mission, especially Your Name, which came out in 2017. That film had such a profound impact on me that ever since then, I wanted to explore much more of the art form and see what Japan had to offer in terms of its entertainment. One Punch Man was always one of those shows that I was familiar with but never personally had an interest in. But one day when I was sitting at my in-laws' house and we were kind of figuring out what we wanted to do, one of my in-laws suggested watching this show, and for me, I kind of wasn't really interested, but I didn't want to say anything, so I just said, okay, turn it on, we'll see how it is. And I ended up loving it so much that after watching the first 2 episodes with them, I binged the rest of it on my own, and like I said, I bought the Blu-ray, I have the shirt now, even Saitama himself is the logo on my Facebook wall for now. And that was back in 2017 when I watched that show, and so I've been clamoring for a second season for quite a while now, and we eventually got it when it premiered here in North America on Hulu earlier in April. Now that the season officially ended about a week and a half ago, I'm ready to share my thoughts on season 2 and how I think it relates to season 1. Generally, there's been a much more mixed reception towards season 2 than there was to season 1. There are a lot of different reasons for this, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that season 1 was just so dang good that everyone's expectations for what the continuation of the story would be were probably much higher than they should have been. That happens a lot with entertainment where the original entry is so good that people expect that the follow-up would be even better, if not at least just as good. But season 2 had a lot of production problems behind it that I think held it back from being as great as it possibly could have been. The main thing is that the original animation studio that was behind season 1, Madhouse, who is also responsible for shows like Death Note, dropped out of the production. They were eventually replaced by JC Staff, and of course the original director and the original writers were taken off too. And so there were a lot of different shakeups in the creative team and the actual production staff that were behind the show. And I think you can easily tell in noting the subtle differences in the art style between the first season and the second season, and the way that the plot develops. But overall, I actually do like the second season enough to say that I think it was worth the wait, although it definitely has a lot of problems, which we'll get into here. Now for season 1, that is pretty much what I would consider to be the perfect anime. The main reason why I don't watch a lot of TV shows is because when you have a show that has gone on for so long, there's so many episodes that if you want to watch the whole entire thing, it's a huge commitment to do so. And ultimately, if it goes in a direction that either gets really boring or betrays what the original good seasons were going for, then that might be really disappointing. But with season 1 of One Punch Man, there is something unique about it with the fact that it was a 12-episode miniseries, so to speak. I mean, heck, if you even took out all of the the interludes and the outros and the intro themes, you could basically cut it down to a 3-hour movie and it would work just as well, probably even better. It's that concise of a narrative, and I think it works extremely well as a parody of both the superhero genre and just shonen anime and manga altogether. It's a hilarious show with excellent comedic timing, gorgeous visuals. I mean, some of the best hand-drawn animation I've ever seen from an anime, and of course just a great story behind it too. I love the character of Saitama and that he is essentially a flawless human being in terms of like his physicality and the things that he is capable of, but he still has a lot to learn in terms of his own existential crises and his purpose in life, because like I said in the intro, he's someone that was able to fulfill his dream of becoming a superhero. Like, he literally turned himself into a superhero because of insane, rigorous exercise. But after this whole transformation that he has, he sees that his life doesn't have as much fulfillment or excitement as he hoped it would. Because of that, his boredom with life and his hope for something greater seeps into every aspect of his life, whether or not he's fighting monsters when he takes them out with one punch. He gets so angry by the fact that, he can't enjoy anything from the goal that he ultimately set out with his becoming a superhero, And it's also hilarious that in his relationships with others, there's so many other people who typify all the cliches and like these type of shonen anime characters where they'll be so boisterous and they're arrogant about their own abilities, and then Saitama will just throw them aside and consider them to be just worthless garbage.
Enough, you idiot! Shorten this stupid story to 20 words or less!
It's great in the moment, but it's a great character study for Saitama himself, and is definitely kind of like a self-critique of the genre, and it works extremely well for the narrative because you understand his perspective, and you're able to relate to him despite the fact that he is everything that represents a character that shouldn't be relatable to an audience. He's overpowered, he can be a bit arrogant, and he has a lot of problems that we ourselves in reality couldn't relate to easily. But just the fact that he seems like a genuine human being that is dissatisfied by the life that he hoped he would enjoy, I think makes for something that is very rewatchable, aside from the fact that the show is just so stupidly entertaining. There's only maybe 1 or 2 episodes that I feel could have been trimmed down or even morphed into one because they feel like filler in comparison to the other episodes of the show. But otherwise, I mean, season 2 is just so incredibly fun to watch, and it's animated to absolute perfection by Madhouse. I adored every second watching One Punch Man, and it is one of my favorite shows of all time. But season 2, this is where some of my issues become a lot more prevalent with the show, and there are a lot of different reasons why. First off, you can easily tell that the animation quality has dipped a little bit in terms of the character designs, the fluidity of the action scenes, some of which come off as just like blurry recycling of images. The fluidity and the strength of the animation has dipped a little bit, but I don't think it looks horrible. I mean, there are some people that have been very, very critical of how this season looks, and I don't think it's warranted, because even though you can tell that JC Staff was put under a time crunch and had a lot of issues behind the scenes, they still produced a show which is full of vivid colors, amazing imagery that I can't get out of my head, and it's still fun to watch. Ultimately, it still feels like the same show, even though it definitely has a different vibe to it. And a lot of that has to do with that the character designs were still retained from the original show, despite being tweaked just a little bit. And overall, I think the same motifs, the ideas are there, and I really hope that in the next season, if they have more time to flesh out their images, they can make it look a lot better. At the core of the show, what matters is the writing, and they definitely have still retained that same style of self-referential comedy and meta humor as well, which I think works well for this series. And the character interactions still feel the same as well, especially with Saitama. If he wasn't savage in season 1, he definitely is in this season as well. Although I wish season 2 had a lot more of him. I think where this season suffers but also excels over the first one is that it focuses a lot more on side characters, some of which I did not care for at all because they didn't get a single ounce of development in the first season. And then in this one, they get a whole entire episode to themselves, like Metal Bat, for example, and then a couple other characters that were in the martial arts tournament. I liked where they were going with that and trying to explore a side of this story from people who may not share the same viewpoint as Saitama does. Season 1 was basically Saitama's whole entire story, and Season 2 is kind of like Saitama interacting with other stories that are going on in the whole narrative. Because of that, I think it's both a blessing and a curse to the show, because on one hand, it kind of helps with the world building and an overall sense as to how these events are impacting the different heroes and their ideologies. But at the same time, Saitama is the reason why Season 1 was so great, because it told his story, it put us on his level. It allowed for us to have both a way into the emotion of the story and the humor of it as well. I think this season also suffers a little bit in the humor department. It's definitely not as funny because it takes on a much more serious tone with all these scenes that the superheroes are in. Not that these scenes aren't compelling. I mean, there are some episodes in this show that are very exciting and action-packed, especially the last few, and they explore the story in a much different way than the first season did, which I appreciated the change of pace there. I wouldn't have wanted something that was essentially a repeat of Season 1. This does feel like its own thing. It tells its own story and is a natural progression from where Season 1 left off. But in the moment, it is disappointing that this season features a lot less of Saitama than it did in Season 1. The animation suffers a little bit, and the plot doesn't feel as cohesive or flows as well as I hoped it would, because there are scenes that drag on too much because they spend time on characters that personally I didn't really care for, and it felt like those scenes were just padded on as filler to kind of get to where the story wants it to be, which I think is ultimately set up for Season 3. I really hope we get a third season because I'm enjoying this show a lot, obviously, and I want to see where it goes. But for now, I think Season 2 is good, don't get me wrong, but definitely suffers in comparison to the first because it feels like a bridge to something else, whereas Season 1 was its standalone thing that works extremely well. Season 2 kind of suffers from the same thing that Halo 2 did, where it has a somewhat of a cliffhanger ending that doesn't have enough resolution, and then you're left wanting more. That can be a good thing because if the thing that you just saw that has a cliffhanger is extremely good, like The Empire Strikes Back, for example, you're going to want to see what comes next. Personally, I think Season 2 is good enough to want to see what happens next, but the issues that are in the storytelling and other aspects of the show leading up to that, I don't think they work as well as I would have liked to. In comparison, I would say Season 1 is much better. I would give that season of the show an A, whereas I think Season 2 would personally get a B- from me. As far as an age recommendation for One Punch Man goes, it is certainly not for kids, although if you're going to rate it in terms of like American ratings, this would probably be like a PG-13, if maybe more like a hard-edged PG-13. The reason for that is because there is some bloody violence in this show and language, even though the language doesn't never gets to like an R type of level. And also in both seasons there is some partial nudity. There's never any like topless women or anything, but there are a couple of female characters that are dressed immodestly, and also for the most part there's a lot of shots of like male buttocks. Overall, I'd say it's probably best for people who are at least 15 years old. Thanks again for watching this video. Please like and subscribe, and also check out my Facebook, Letterboxd, and Instagram pages in the links in the description below to find content that you wouldn't normally find here on my channel. But in the end, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good one.